the battle that Israel is in and the different fronts. One being obviously the very obvious enemy, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, the foreign powers, but then the battle that they're fighting within their own country, because now you have the radical left that has decided that it's okay to start up their little protests again and what have you, but those are really supported by America. They're supported by the Biden administration. They're encouraged by the Biden administration. And then the battle that Israel is fighting worldwide, but really it's germinated on the campuses here in the United States of America, and the protests and so forth that are taking place. And, I didn't mention the names, but I'll mention them again. Soros, Pritzker, Rockefeller, the funding of those that are coming against. And then, as David mentioned, Rick, supposedly we have intel now that knows where the one of the key individuals that we need to take out is at, and where how long have we known where he is? How long have we known where all these hostages are being held, and we're not doing any? And it sounds like 150 members of the intel community, or however many it was, signing a letter saying Russia, 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 which we know was all lies. I want to know where the nooses are. Why didn't these guys all get taken out on the White House lawn and strung up on gallows and hung? Because that was treason they committed, and they should have been hung.
Here's the key, Greg. You need to understand. The guy they were supporting won, so they didn't hang anybody. So given that, that's a basic rule. But from if you're on the winning side, you don't get hung. If you're on the losing side, you end up with 4 years of lawfare against you. But having said that, one of the things that strikes me about the situation in Israel is time has worked against Israel. Every time they've slowed down because of concern about civilian casualties, it doesn't matter how many civilians aren't killed because of that. The momentum builds that any action in Gaza is evil because civilians might be killed. So the more careful they are, the less capacity they have to operate. The irony here is, with Rafah, there is in their interests right now to get it over with as rapidly as possible. That means not worrying about killing civilians. That means going through and taking out Hamas where you find them. If they use human shields, those human shields are basically, they don't work anymore because we're shooting through them. Ultimately, what Joe Biden's policy and what the so-called world's policy has done is it's disincentivized civilian-friendly warfare. And that is the big danger here, because Joe Biden's going to be responsible for killing far more civilians than even Hamas, because he is making it clear to Israel that you need to get this done now. And you can't have 6 weeks of messing around in Rafah trying to do it the right way and actually costing more IDF lives as a result. Instead, you need to make it 2 weeks, because you're going to get tried in front of the International Crime Commission anyway. So you might as well get it done and save your own lives, and then have it off the headlines once these guys are taken out. That's what Joe Biden has just done. He's just made it dramatically more dangerous for civilians in Gaza, because they no longer are going to have the Israeli shield protecting them.
Rick, there are a lot of profound points in what you just said, a lot. I mean, the first on the highest level is, we have to remember war is a grisly business by its very nature, which is why we in the West, we America, we in Europe, we in Israel, we in Australia and Japan don't really want to start wars anymore, because we know what the cost is.
Right.
But the other side didn't, and they don't care, frankly, because they don't care how many people they kill. And they say so. I mean, you see all these Hamas leaders saying the problem with Israel, or the reason why Israel will lose, is they value life and we value death. So you see this, but the irony is exactly what you said. Decisive war is the quickest path to peace and saving civilians. Whether it's the Americans fighting 100% and defeating Japan 100%, even at the expense of using nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It saved multiples more lives
Millions.
by doing that than not doing that. And that was understood. So now we have this idea this administration is putting forward that, well, you can fight your war, but you cannot have any civilian casualties. Well, there's two problems with that. One is it's impossible. Second of all, this administration is populated by the complete absence of military expertise. Everything they've touched with the militaries has been completely disastrous, whether it's Afghanistan or so forth. But then the third thing is, war, you do want to make a point. You want to make a point to those who start wars. Don't.
Well,
for real, don't. Not
right. And
Joe
let's be
Biden,
clear.
don't.
Let's be clear. Right now, Hamas can say they won the war. Because what's happening? Israel is under attack on our campuses. Israel is under attack around the world. Israel's action in self-defense is being held up to international war crime scrutiny because they're defending their own country. And Israel, which is the only country that's actually allowing humanitarian aid to get in, is being accused of starving the people in Gaza, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. And finally, bottom line is, our administration's brilliant solution is, let's reward those who killed Israeli civilians who had a big military attack against a music festival to kill Jewish people indiscriminately, who chopped the heads off of babies, who raped women and young children. We're going to reward them by saying, oh, yeah, we're also going to create a state and give you exactly what you want, and we're going to make Israel more vulnerable than ever. Well, I'm sorry, Hamas has won unless Israel wipes Hamas out of Gaza, at which point perhaps those who control the West Bank will sit there and say, well, I don't want that outcome. Perhaps Hezbollah will say, I don't want that outcome. But right now, what the Biden administration is doing is they're waving a flag in front of Hezbollah and the terrorists on the West Bank and say, do whatever you want to do, we got your back. That is what they're doing. It is dangerous, and Israel has to get this war over with. And by getting it over with, that means they have to drive Hamas into the sea, into the giant wall that Egypt built to keep them out, and has to eliminate them. And if they do that, then Hamas will still say, oh, well, we won. But at the very least, the people in the West Bank and the people in Hezbollah will know that the consequences are so dire that they would not dare bear. They don't want to bear them.
Well, I think something else, and David, you mentioned it, and Rick, you've mentioned before too, and that has to do with, the partnership between Islam and this globalist elitists. They're working in concert.
Yep.
And their two targets here are the United States of America and God-fearing, constitutional, we the people patriots, and the people of Israel that support the true intent of the state of Israel and its defense. And when I stop and think about this, throughout history, it has always been the anti-Semite movement, that the destruction of Jews has always preceded the persecution of Christians. That's just been a fact.
Well, and I don't think we can miss the fact that, people might think, well, what about Europe? That's a Western culture, and the fact of the matter is, Europe's already lost. The left knows that. They know that Europe is gone. Yep. All you have to do is look at the Conservative Party in England, which the Tories they would be far leftist when it comes to climate change agenda, for instance. And so they don't bear anything close to American ideas of markets or the like. They are a controlled society. So given that, they've already gotten the population influx into Western Europe that they know they're a generation away from taking over.
Sadiq Khan is a Muslim,
Right.
who has basically allowed Sharia law to take over London.
Right.
And if an Islamist assaults you, there was a picture that came out over the weekend of a Muslim that beat an English woman to the ground, taking her purse. Understand that under Sharia, they consider that to be taqiyya, which means a tribute to them. They believe that woman's purse and everything that she owns already belongs to them, and she has no right to it. Just like the globalist Marxist elites believe that you and I should surrender our properties, surrender our bank accounts, and say thank you and move on.
Well, and one of the great ironies is, and David, feel free to weigh in on this, but it seems to be, they've been talking about the red-green axis for a while in terms of and what we're actually looking at is the elite, the globalist elitists believe, the Davos crowd, believe that when the one country that stands in the way of world governance is the United States, the strength of our sovereignty. They've done everything to try to break down the strength of our society, from open borders to open borders from labor to open borders from free of tariffs. Those two things were effectively used to break down America's sovereignty. Now they're bold enough to say they've attacked our founders, saying we don't have any exceptionalism. The founders were evil. The heart of our country is evil. The Constitution and Declaration of Independence should be thrown out the window, even though they're the most remarkable documents in human history in terms of governance. They should be thrown out the window. And we should embrace something along the line of Plato's Republic, where the very smart people get to tell everybody else what to do because they believe they're the very smart people. The problem, and they embrace China, and they want China to be the winner because China ultimately is a command and control economy, and they believe they can control China. Well, the challenge smart people have is they don't have any armies, and at the end of the day, if they've got 1 million Chinese attacking Geneva, they aren't going to live. But they're not that smart. They don't recognize that smart people without armies are just dead smart people. So it's but that's the game they're playing, and they don't realize the only thing that protects them is America, is our strength standing up for intellectual capacity and intellectual freedom and the like. And they can't exist in a world that they envision.
And our hands are tied as well. I mean, when you hear somebody like Tucker castigating America for having dropped the bombs in Japan, he's hardcore on that. He hardcore believes that America is evil and has no room to apologize for having stopped what would have ultimately been the wiping out of all of Japan.
I would just, if I were confronted by this with Tucker, I would ask him a question. I would say, why didn't Japan surrender after the first one? Because we never had to drop a bomb on Nagasaki if Japan says, oh man, we can't do this. But no, they didn't surrender.
Nope.
Japan's failure to surrender killed all those people in Nagasaki.
They doubled down. They doubled down.
I would just invite him to just watch a simple movie. And I referred, when I had some students in a class 20 years ago, it was the movie D-Day, which had John Wayne and a bunch of other figures of taking on, and the American troops going on.
Right, is the largest.
Longest Day, yes.
Yeah.
And the American troops going onto the shores and just getting, so many dying, so many drowning. The difficulties of actually taking land, which were, a lot of the Pacific Rim movies after World War II really didn't show how horrific the loss was for little dot islands. D-Day really did. And then you go to Saving Private Ryan, which was more graphic because you had more sound.
Yeah, but there's another one. I need to find it again, gentlemen. There's another one out there that specifically has to do with Japan and the Pacific, and it's very real and very gritty about what our soldiers faced in fighting against Japan on one of those outlying islands. I think it was actually Clint Eastwood's movie about something of our father. I think that was about Japan.
It takes a country that loads planes with TNT and has their men fly those planes into a ship to try to stop the oncoming onslaught. Will do anything, and to try to fight door to door through the entire, just the main island.
Well, it is. It's called Flags. What you need to do is Tucker needs to watch Flags of Our Father and see the bloody conquest for Iwo Jima and what happened to our soldiers on that island repeatedly. And then he will understand what Japan was willing to do in order to never surrender at that time.
I think there's also a generational thing. Tucker's younger than us. Those of us, Rick, Pastor, we grew up knowing people who fought World War II. We had neighbors. We had teachers in elementary school, high school, who fought in World War II. And we grew up on the movies about what they went through, on what they did. But before there was The Longest Day is one of those movies. The Clint Eastwood movie is much later, but things of the Guns of Navarone or some of it's fiction, but very much describes what they went through, and some is real, like Tora Tora Tora. We grew up in the '60s, or the Longest Day. I think our generation needs to go back to our education system and force them to study American history in World War II and understand there's a number of things about it. It wasn't a war of choice. We were attacked. Number two, it wasn't a war we all knew we were going to win. Frankly, Americans at the beginning of the war were not sure. It was
rightfully so.
Yeah, I mean, we forget that if Britain had fallen, all the African colonies would have been Nazi. The South America was already pretty much Nazi. That's why we had to create OSS, the precursor to the CIA, to try to stop those governments from siding with Franco and the Spanish government, who was aligned with the Nazis. If Britain had fallen, Franco would have gone all the way, and so would the Spanish colonies. And we would have been fighting Nazis coming up through the Panama Canal, through the Caribbean, using British colonies, having the British fleet under their command. And on the other side, the Japanese were already working their way up through the Aleutian Islands, heading into Alaska, as well as their Navy. We forget, Midway was the final battle before the attempt to take Hawaii.
Well, just to put perspective on it, when my mom was a kid, they had blackout curtains. She lived in Long Beach, California, a big naval base. And they had blackout curtains. And they had, the spotlights that we all kind of look at, and they go in the air because they're advertising there's a car sale or something. Well, those were what was used to see planes overhead. And they actually had one incident where there actually was a sighting, which was Long Beach, California. Okay, this isn't Hawaii. This isn't 2,000 miles into the ocean. This was our shore. You had and on the East Coast, you had German subs off the coast of New York. That was we know there were Germans who ended up landing because they had a malfunction of one of their subs and ended up landing on American shore. We did not know we were going to win for a very simple reason. We were doing something we truly hadn't ever done before. And World War I, we got in at the very end and we tipped the balance, but we never had to shoulder the complete burden of a war. and this magnitude. And in World War II, we did. And oh, by the way, for those of you who think that was fun, the same. My parents and others were busy saving rubber. They were busy saving, not being able to do things, giving up staples. So they're not staples, but staples in terms of things you eat, in order to support the war effort. Women went into the workplace and built planes and did a whole series of jobs on the assembly line, so we could win the war based on our industrial capacity. We didn't win the war based on what we went into the war with. We won the war because we had an industrial capacity that expanded rapidly. And some say GM won the war, and they're not far from wrong when they say that. So, ultimately, that was
Ford.
But it's imperative that our generation teach the younger ones, because when I see these kids on college campuses, if they see a little penny that's silver, they'll sit there and they'll think, well, maybe that's a fake penny. Right. We grew up, we knew what those silver pennies were. They were steel pennies, and we knew why steel pennies. Because copper was so valuable in the war effort that from 41, 42, 43, the government stamped steel pennies instead of copper pennies because they needed to spare the copper. We knew it. We grew up with it, and we collected them. We knew what it meant. We had the stories. We need to teach our young kids. This is what war really is. Well, Israel right now is forging its own World War II generation.
And let's be clear. Well, let's be clear, folks. For those that will sit here and throw out things like neocon and all that other kind of. Let me be really clear. We don't want war. That's the whole point of this. We don't want this war. And there was a time when America would go into these kinds of situations with the mindset that we're going to end it quickly so that there is the least amount of loss of life, both on our side and on the side of those that we're having to go into war with. Recognizing
at the deepest level, the American value is we want to mind our own business.
You want to be left alone.
We want to be left alone. So when we go to war, we want to get it done so we can go home and mind our business again.
Right.
We want to win and win big. And that is done decisively, quickly, rapidly. And that way you buy yourself. There will always be another crazy who comes. There will never be world peace like that unless there's a fundamental, religious event. But given man who he is right now, we are going to have more wars. But you buy yourself a lot of safety and a lot of years of calm if you decisively defeat evil when it rears its head. And then maybe a generation or two later, another will come by. But that's what the Israelis are being told by the Biden administration from day one. It turns out that we told them not to go in on the ground. Now, you have 1,500 people slaughtered like that. Of course you're going to go in the ground, just try to get the hostages, let alone to get the people who did it.
Yeah.
But the second thing is, every single step of the way, we have told the Israelis, slow down, be more careful if you want to maintain our support. And now all of a sudden we're saying, time's up. Stop.
Yeah, they ran the clock out is what they did.
They ran the clock out. And this was apparently what they wanted to do all along.
And guess what? Netanyahu's in the position where he has no choice but to finish the job politically in Israel.
Right.
That's what he has to do politically, and it's the right thing for them to do. The irony of this is, if we did our job, we would have gotten our quote-unquote ally, Qatar, to basically take the Hamas leadership and jail them for international war crimes. That would have been the actual response that would have cut this war in half, because once the fighters had their leaders arrested and
cut off,
they're off the head, and then the fighters aren't going to sit there and say, "I'm not dying for this," because the leaders would all be ratting them out. They'd show them who they were. So because we didn't pressure Qatar to end the safe haven they've given Hamas leadership. And we should have, because we did. This war continues, and it's just another example of Biden being more interested in trying to go back in time to when the so-called Palestinians were the centerpiece of our Middle Eastern policy, rather than the reality of setting up a Southern alliance that were Western friendly, that would Jewish and Muslim, that would stand up against Iran, because ultimately the Biden administration is an Iranian proxy.
That's right. And the region is seeing that. But I want to make one point also about the anti-Semitism on the campuses and so forth is, again, this is elite driven. And we saw something very interesting in Europe just now, because I had written off Europe. And unfortunately, we need to look at Europe, because what we're seeing is, with Israel, I keep saying, watch Israel, because this is our little laboratory for experimenting what we're going to do here, what the Biden people are doing with their riots and all that. But look at Europe, because this is their model for where they want to go. And what happened is, in Europe, the elites are openly destroying their own society. The Davos elite that you referred to. And the best example of it was, we just had 2 days ago a Eurovision song contest. That's the big song contest in Europe. We don't really pay attention to it here, and it's pretty kitschy music. But it was an orgy of hatred toward the Israelis who participate, whether it's the singers and the judges, and outside the crowds trying to get in and kill the Israeli singer, the attacks on the convoy of her going from the hotel, the boos in the audience when she mounted the stage, and everything. But what's so interesting is the way the contest is judged is, you have a popular vote in European countries, and then you have the judges, the elites, the broadcast authority, literally their NPR, their National Public Radio, their public broadcasters. So the judges are the public broadcaster and the European people. The Israelis swept the popular vote. 15 of the 32 European countries put Israel in first place by a lot in the popular vote. Overall in Europe, the Israelis finished at the top, in unprecedented level. The judges, the exact opposite. Most gave them 0. They finished way down, and just didn't give them any points at all. What you see there, and it was obviously political, what you see there is the European people were sick of it too, and their elites were pandering again to the Islamists, to the Muslims, allowing this to happen. It's exactly like here. This administration is tolerating, if not now encouraging, anti-Semitism on our campuses.
Well, we'll see what happens with the in the various countries' elections, France in particular, but Germany as well. Because the truth of the matter is, I agree that the people recognize hate when they see it, and they're rejecting it. And the elites are so afraid of the migrant population, the so-called migrants who've come there and have been invited there by those elites. They're so afraid of them because they know they're violent thugs who can't be controlled, that they have effectively cowered rather than doing their duty as leaders of their country. And that, that's why the people, a lot of times, unfortunately, the people are the last to know that they surrendered. And the people aren't ready to surrender, but their leaders are. Unless they change their leaders, Europe is beyond repair. I think some of the Eastern European countries are far better off than the so-called Western European countries. But if, basically in Europe, how France and Germany goes, and Italy to some extent, how France, Germany, and Italy goes, how the continent goes. And right now, that's not looking good. And by the way, Greece was great. It was about 300 BC. So if you want to make Greece great again, you have to like.
I agree.
go back
I fully agree. I don't buy Plato's philosopher king, which was that rule of the elites that you mentioned. But other than that, they produced Aristotle and others.
Well, remember, I think it's our elites that have tried to make the Republic, Plato's Republic, to be this great dialogue on governance, when in fact, and we'll end on this academic note for you, Greg, when in fact the whole question in Plato's Republic it's called Thrasymachus' challenge. The whole question was, is there any value in doing good for good's sake? Or, absent God, he puts in, absent God, is there any value for doing good for good's sake? And Socrates attempts to answer that, and quite honestly, he fails. Because absent God, if it is survival of the fittest, then you're really dumb not to be the fittest. Okay, and that doesn't have a moral character to it. It is a raw power that defines morality and a survival of the fittest world. And Plato was trying to argue the survival of the fittest was the way it should be, but the people who should tell what the fittest were, he had to carve out his little exemption. People like him. If you just put people like me in charge, everything would be okay. And the truth is, every time we give lots of power to only a couple of people, really bad stuff happens.
Well, it's the introduction of subjectivism, right? As opposed to God's objective view, which is concrete and absolute, and that becomes the problem. You can, and honestly, that's a big part of the problem right now that we're facing with our Constitution. We have, particular laws and concerns that are being bantied about regarding whether or not you can have certain people saying things. One of them is the communists. Remember that in 1954, we put into effect an anti-communist law that said you couldn't have a communist party in America. It's never truly been challenged, but there are those now that suggest that, well, our Constitution would never allow America to have such a thing. And perhaps that's true. The problem that we have in America today is that America has turned its back on the one thing that upheld both the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and true freedom and liberty, and that is God. And until we get back to that, we are completely lost. We can't win this battle without him.